warm welcome to all of you. Disha Nawani, who teaches sociology of education. That's a specialization at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Bombay. She has published extensively and was also finished a PhD from JNU. We have Shumona Goel with us, who is a now Delhi-based filmmaker. She studied at Bard College, New York, and then at SOAS, and is currently into activism and writing. And we have Professor Manindra Nath Thakur, who teaches political science at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. Thank you all for joining this panel discussion. This is in honor of Professor Avijit Pathak, a small token of gratitude to a teacher. And this is in the context of a book that he recently published. And the book is called Culture, Politics, and the Aesthetics of Living, The Spirit of Being a Wanderer. So this is a collaboration of the Department of Sociology, Sri Venkateswara College, where I teach. My name is Nabnipa Bhattachjee, and Galp Lok, which is headed and run by Avijit Pathak, who also teaches sociology at at South Asian University, New Delhi. So I now hand it over to Dev for continuing the discussion.
This is a pleasure to join in this discussion and moderate the discussion, which will be carried out by the three distinguished panelists Nipa has just now introduced. I must state at the onset that for me personally, it's never easy to discuss a book as simple as Professor Avijit Pathak's this book, and in past as well, because other books as well, because one really steps aside from some of the comfortable vantage points, and it's not so easy to do such a thing. I would request Shumona to tell us about the book.
Thank you, Nipa and Dev. I'd like to just begin by saying that I was Professor Avijit Pathak's student more than 25 years ago. That was a very transformative period of my life. And I am sure that those of you who have also studied with him will very much understand me when I say that I have been profoundly inspired by him as a teacher and as a mentor. As Nipa explained, I'm not a sociologist by profession. I've been working for more than 20 years as an activist in India and also as a filmmaker. And through my work as an activist and a filmmaker, I have also been part of the dialogue about modernity and what it means for India. So thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation. I really enjoyed Professor Avijit Pathak's book. I found it typically generous in spirit, but also very accessible, conveying a very real sense of political engagement. So thank you again for bringing me into this conversation. I wanted to begin by reading to you from page 90, where he writes, "My romance with railway stations and running trains used to enchant me. Seeing the landscape through the windows of the train, feeling a sense of connectedness with a tree, a temple, the echo of an old Geeta Dutt song wafting from a tea shop near the railway track, a village girl on a bicycle moving towards school, farmers sowing seeds in the expanded paddy fields of the Gangetic belt, women washing clothes in a pond, and suddenly the vibrations of an old town as the train begins to enter Mughal Sarai Junction. I was really awake and alive." Of course, this is a very cinematic description of the landscape from an Indian train window. And when I was reading this passage, I started to think about, obviously there's been no oversight on Professor Pathak's part. We can be absolutely sure and clear that he fully understands the British Empire constructed the Indian Railway to colonize India. And the Indian Railway was developed to exploit India's natural resources, to rule over India. And yet this glorious cinematic description of the train, the very icon of Indian modernity that we are also concerned with in this book. So for me, this moment in the book brought up this awareness that there are aspects of modernity in some contexts that we accept. And how is it that at the same time, we also object and reject aspects of modernity in other contexts? And like other great thinkers, I think Professor Pathak creates for us a tension, a productive space to situate a conversation. I think what is unique to this book is how this tension, as I've pointed out in this passage, finds its expression in a certain kind of melancholia that's also expressed very poignantly throughout the book. And perhaps that melancholia is comes from, refusing any universally valid knowledge, either rejecting modernity or accepting modernity. That ambivalence we see so clearly in this passage, or experience so clearly in this passage. So I just wanted to point out that I found there to be that this ambivalence, that this tension creates a certain kind, is expressed through a kind of melancholia that comes up throughout the book. And I also thought that, without having a universally valid knowledge, it sort of creates a vacuum of a kind, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for human values, and that is very much emphasized throughout the book. So I wanted to use a very simple example that would resonate with everyone to make this point. I think that something I took away from the book. We've all had this feeling when we eat a meal, and after we eat so much, we feel like, I've really overeaten, that was too much. And sometimes we eat a meal and we feel like, oh, that was really unsatisfying. I wish I could have eaten something more. But of course, there's a time, even children know this, when you feel like, I've just eaten enough, not too much, not too little. There's a precise feeling that accompanies this, a feeling of satisfaction, a sense of well-being, of satisfaction, I think, that accompanies this feeling when you've neither eaten too much nor too little. And I think that why I want to use this example was to talk about what the book offered to me. It reminded me to tune into that capacity that we as human beings have of actually having a feeling of being satisfied, of having just enough. And how is it that we come closer to that feeling of satisfaction is through perhaps maybe making certain responsible choices, building our capacity to make responsible choices, and constantly checking that we're not making choices coming from a space of deprivation, but actually from a space of abundance, of enough. And for me, I thought what was, coming throughout in the book was a kind of politics that's new us to think about at this time, especially in the context of the COVID crisis also, is, maybe we need to think about what are the choices that we are making on a day-to-day basis. And do we really need some of the things that we just blindly accept? And how do we empower ourselves and cultivate this capacity to say, this is enough for me. I don't actually need this, so I won't accept that. Rather than allowing modernity and post-modernity to kind of choose us. I think that this is something that came through to me very much, and I started to think about these questions again with this passage.
I started reading the book with a critical lens. You know why? Because many of my friends keep telling me that Avijit Pathak writes good literature, but not very good social science. And I thought completely otherwise. I don't have deep eye to see the literary quality of the text. I wanted to see the kind of explanatory value of the text and the methodological issues that he's raising. And I've been making this point since long, and thankfully this book is the best example of the point that I've been making. I've been saying that the colonial intellectuals, post-colonial intellectuals have a big problem. Their problem is that, or our problem is that we have a total disconnection between being, thinking, and knowing.
Right.
We treat knowledge as something outside that we try to acquire. And once we acquire that, then we start explaining our experiences with the help of that. So in this process, what happens is that we become very alienated beings. So I have taken many intellectuals taking U-turn gradually, or somebody telling me that we need to take a leap of faith. But in the public domain, the person will keep talking about the reason. In the private conversations, he will tell me that, why don't you take a leap of faith? You are not taking that. So I think this is a typical problem, and I don't want to take names in this, but there are many examples I can count on this, of how this is the typical problem that these people are facing. This book probably is a great methodological departure from this point. And it reestablishes this interconnection between being, thinking, and knowing. I mean, the point that he begins with, the very first sentence of the book, that I do not see things as a specialist all the time. And of course, I do see as a specialist too, but not all the time. And sometimes I just want to become a general human being, watching, experiencing things. And the kind of professional tag that I'm a professional sociologist, he drops that at times. And this dropping is extremely important. The social science, after all, is a colonial subject where we are kind of, and a lot of debate is going on decolonizing today. So it's becoming very difficult to understand how do we decolonize if you don't interconnect these things together. And Professor Pathak has done this in a very, very interesting way. And the way he says that his understanding of the ontology is totalized. He does not want to kind of bifurcate between spirituality, politics, philosophy, teaching, pedagogy. Everything is interconnected for him. And that's a very important point that he makes. But that gives him a kind of picture of the totality and very transformative understanding of the reality. So this is the first point that that came to my mind while reading the book. This also takes away from a professor the arrogance of being a specialist, and that we can see in his personality every day. And I feel jealous of him when my students come back to me and say that, he's a great teacher, and a lot of them opt for his courses. But I kept inquiring for last. I think this is what is very special, that he connects with the human beings. For him, the students are not students in the modernist sense. They are friends with whom he is conversing on many things together. It's not only sociology of a kind that is being, the knowledge is being delivered, is happening and with this connectedness. Second thing that came to my mind is that he very interestingly creates a Purupach. Very powerfully, very honestly creates a Purupach. His Purupach is what? I just read out few words that he writes for his Purupach. Is militant nationalist. And this is the first word. So remember, there's an importance of being the first word. Religious fundamentalism, social Darwinism, technologies of the surveillance, hyper mechanical, hyper masculine aggression, and culture of narcissism. These are the things that these are the words that attributes to the Purupach. And then he says that this is what ignites me and forces me to think and to reflect and to counter, to critique, to imagine, to dream. And he then goes on, which is not typical social science method of engaging with the reality. I mean, dreaming may not be considered as typical social science method, but these are the methods that he introduces in engaging with the social reality, which is just wonderful. And all these things then brings home a kind of politics, which is never out. Right. A sociologist saying that there's a politics in it. It's not without politics is a wonderful thing. And his politics is full of aesthetics, full of spirituality, and he's open to engage with thinkers like Marx and Gandhi together, or Ambedkar, or Tagore, or in fact Osho, or Krishnamurti, or anybody, in fact, together. That is a wonderful methodological point that he brings in. So his Purupach is countered by an Uttarpach, and he creates the Uttar. He argues that, well, what is needed is to reconnect, re-establish the interconnectivity that capitalism has taken away from us. Capitalism has alienated all four kinds of alienations. We know that from nature, from human beings, from labor, from self, all alienation has taken place, and we need to really strike back this interconnection. Once we strike back this interconnection that he does in the village context when he's talking about, that provides him a different kind of vision. The Sanjay's vision to see far off, and then he tries to then look at the reality and kind of reads a lot of expressions of human beings over the decades, like through films. I wish he could have reflected on certain novels also. I'm sure he has a list of novels to refer to, must be referring in the class. But the films that he has referred to and the way he has analyzed the films is also a methodological breakthrough in the film studies, I guess.
Right.
And it allows not only into social relationships, but also the kind of impact of the social has on the person, the individual, and the social dialectics. The dialectics of modernity that he talks about, how that has actually consumed us completely, converted all these things into industry. Entertainment is industry, tourism is industry, education is industry, healthcare is industry. And by converting them into industry, it has converted us into consumers in the industry and taken away the kind of enjoyment that we used to have as human beings. So I think that is his Uttarpach. He says that modern self has to be countered by this new self, the creative self. So the obsessive self and the creative self who drops the CV out from his life and tries to engage with human beings.
Right.
I mean, this is something that is fascinating. And this will decolonize social science if we do social science of this kind. The last word, tremendous trust in the inner world, the strength of the inner world, about which people don't talk much. I call it accessing the self. And this is a term that Roy Bhaskar gave to this kind of idea when I was talking to him. He said that this the way to counter this obsessive self and the exploitative modernity and the capitalism that has kind of consumed everything is to access the inner self. And this is Gandhi, I guess. And the revolt against the system will have to be on the streets, of course, but not without accessing the self. Otherwise, we will produce worst kind of system that we are facing today. So I think this is the politics of love that he talks about. And I would call it politics of unconditional love. So right from giving a new methodological tool to us to look at things, giving us kind of interconnectedness that has to be reclaimed, he takes us to the journey of doing a new kind of politics also. I think this is just fantastic, innovative writing that we have got in social science. And the social scientists, if they can read this carefully, I'm sure it will be a big contribution in what we call the decolonizing mind.
Right.
I'm done. Thank you.
Very wonderfully put it. Professor Thakur, thank you. The idea of total ontology is certainly a big contribution of this kind of writing, which helps us understand that one has to operate with that totality of existence in which one is social scientist, as well as an aesthete, and as well as someone who thinks about politics. However, some of us from our generation also get frustrated with this vision. Why? Because institutionally, there are too many marauders, there are too many murderers out there in various institutions who would try to squeeze you, mutilate you, intimidate you. I mean, I have so many of people around me. I have faced them in various.
We all have people around us.
Yeah, but
monsters. Yeah.
Yeah. Even then, it's very important to uphold a practice and a vision like this, where one can still think of thinking freely about various issues and not compromise on the aesthetics of life while doing social sciences. So from there, I will come to Professor Disha Nawani, and I'm sure there would be much more pointers emerging from her reading of the book.
Thank you very much, Dave and Nipa, first of all, for inviting me to talk about Pathak's book. It's not been easy. I've read the book twice. It's been quite a challenge for me because he's been my guide. And I've written something which I'm going to read out from. I'm quite excited because from the fact that I'm Pathak's first PhD student. Happy not because this fact is of any special or particular significance, but like with all things first, a special bond does get established, which is difficult to erase. I also feel proud, not because I consider myself any different or superior from other students, but because of his humility, magnanimity of heart, which appreciates my work and makes me believe that if he's saying I'm doing good work, then it must be good. So I'm very clear about that. On a more serious note, I'm quite nervous to speak about his book, and more importantly, through the book about him as well. And there are three reasons for this. First, the book reflects different facets of his personality and his deep and abiding interest in almost everything that life offers, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to do justice to all of that. Second, like in any creative endeavor, it's difficult to separate the artist from his creation. Similarly, and more so is the case with Pathak and his writings, it's a huge responsibility, and by no measure of imagination is the task simple. Third, despite a simple demeanor, sense of humor, and childlike laughter, which can be quite deceptive at times, lies a deeply philosophical, inquisitive, sensitive, and a free-spirited soul which does not like to be labeled or slotted into artificially created categories. In this book, Pathak describes himself as a wanderer and allows the reader to accompany him on a fascinating journey across an entire gamut of philosophers, thinkers, filmmakers, films, novelists, songs, theories, and even places. All those things, big or small, sacred or profane, that have influenced him in some way or the other. In his own words, he says, I seek to communicate, break the barrier between serious and popular writing, and allow my reason to converse with my heart. The totality of life arouses my interest, and I wander around the domains of aesthetics and religiosity, politics and culture, or pedagogy and philosophy. It's quite amazing to see how he navigates with ease between the mundane spaces of everyday activities and rituals and the deeply contemplative and meditative space from which he reflects. If I were to attempt in my own modest way to summarize the core of this book, it would perhaps be, I mean, I could be wrong, it would be how to make sense of one's life in relation to almost everything around us, the good, bad, and the ugly. To help the reader do that, Pathak takes us through his own life experiences and shares a manner in which he deals with questions pertaining to life and death, fear and freedom, despair and hope, etc. The book raises fundamental questions which are bound to force us into reflecting on our own lives. What is the book about? To put it simplistically, there are three broad threads underlying the book with different foci but interconnected with each other. They are first the society and individual, where he comments on the existing malaise in society, inner turmoil impacting individuals, some of which is anxiety, fear of death, compulsive desire to look good, stay connected electronically, be appreciated, etc. He also expresses concern over rising incidents of terrorism, state oppression, toxic nationalism, violent politics in the name of honoring the fetish of nation, sexual violence, humiliation of the human soul, brute masculinity and distorted sexuality, consumerism, objectification of relationship. He's particularly perturbed by the age of surveillance in which the culture of trust and communication is getting lost. In the age of surveillance, we lose what he writes. In the age of surveillance, we lose what is absolutely necessary for retaining our sanity, the culture of trust and communication. He believes that loneliness is the price we have to pay for our own progress. How technology has created new needs, equated progress with loss of freedom, the freedom to love, share, and care, all pervasive language of fear, conspiracy, and surveillance, which he finds deeply distressing. Second, I would say that he talks about factors or people or ideas which have influenced the way he thinks. There's an entire range of people from different walks of life that he's influenced by: philosophers, filmmakers, writers, pedagogues, artists, musicians, etc. He acknowledges the contribution of each one of them, right from Marx to Tagore to Vivekananda to Aurobindo to Thich Nhat Hanh, Ambedkar, Krishnamurti Tagore, Satyajit Ray, Bhupen Hazarika, Raj Kapoor to Rumi. The list is long and diverse. He also acknowledges the contribution of films such as Mahanagar, Garam Hawa, Khamoshi, Avara, Sadgati, Art Satya, Sujata, etc., in sharpening his sensitivity and enriching his sociological imagination. For him, watching films is not a casual pastime activity. He relates to stories and their visual narration, identifies with the inner world of characters, feels their pain, laughs with them. For him, seeing thought provoking films or reading great literature is a cleansing process. And the eternal optimist that he is, he firmly believes that stories that unite cinema with life and awakens the archetypes of a collective unconscious have to be told repeatedly. And the third, I would say, there's a lot of insight which one can draw from his work. He advises the reader to live in the here and now and cultivate the ethics of care in which we acknowledge the presence of the other, art of compassionate listening, absolute mindfulness, etc. It would be both naive and unnecessary for me to even try to summarize the central ideas. I don't even have the competence to do that. What is evident from the book, however, is his clarity of ideas and thought and conviction of belief, years of scholarship and deep engagement with ideas, and abhorrence of false binaries. He firmly believes that binaries such as Hindu versus Marxist, reactionary versus subaltern, radical versus conservatism does not allow the mind to grow, to go deeper, and to enter the domain of ambiguities and paradoxes. That's how he's able to see convergences between Vivekananda's spirituality and Bhagat Singh's atheism. In this age where great figures are often appropriated, he writes, in this age where great figures are often appropriated, stereotyped, and falsified, one needs to be cautious. For example, how often are we told, particularly by the radical left, that Bhagat Singh was a revolutionary and atheist, whereas Vivekananda was just a Hindu saint. One was a secularist, another was a believer, and so on and so forth. He further writes, I wish to explore the meaning of Bhagat Singh's atheism and Vivekananda's religiosity and argue why it's important to learn from the atheism as well as religiosity in order to live productively and meaningfully for creating a better world. I think only Pathak can write like this. And it's in a sharply polarized world. He writes fearlessly on a wide range of issues. It's amazing the way he's been writing, playing on front foot, and I feel really proud each time I read his work and also very emotional about it. He appreciates Ambedkar without dismissing the importance of Gandhi. While I celebrate Ambedkar as an extraordinary emancipator, I would appeal to his stubborn followers, don't make the mistake of reducing him to an infallible god, a similar mistake that many Gandhians did with Gandhi. In response to insider versus outsider debate, he says, I refuse to judge the aesthetics of art on the basis of the creator's caste or class. I have therefore no hesitation in learning, say, from both Om Prakash Valmiki's Dutron, a powerful Dalit autobiography, and forward cast Bimal Roy's remarkably sensitive film Sujata, a film that depicts the inner turmoil of an untouchable woman and her relationship with the forward cast. I prefer openness rather than closure. Somewhere else, he says, in this environment of excessive and narrow nationalism, instead of watching the Red Fort spectacle, I choose to watch Satyu's Garam Hawa and Govind Nilani's Ard Satya and begin to make sense of the prevailing state of affairs, indicating the consequences of our fractured independence. So, where does one place his book? It's neither a typical academic book vying to be reviewed in peer-reviewed journals with specialized vocabulary, methodological constraints, and compulsive references, nor is it one of those self-help books which adorn particular shelves of bookstores in airports, malls, etc.
Right.
For him, perhaps, this self-reflective exercise was therapeutic and spiritually comforting in some sense. However, I'm not too sure if I can say the same thing about its readership. Being in JNU for almost 3 decades, I would imagine his concern largely for the youth of the country, and his advice to them would certainly have been his primary concerns. Though he himself believes that it may appeal to a rainbow of readers, from scholars to seekers, or from university students to philosophic anarchists. The book offers several insights which have inherent appeal, and I possibly cannot do justice to both the depth and breadth of ideas dealt with in this book. Pathak's honesty, straightforwardness, and depth of knowledge all come across quite strikingly in the book. I would urge the readers to approach or read the book slowly, carefully, as if one is on a leisurely journey with a friend, savoring, absorbing, disagreeing, arguing, learning, teaching, critiquing, and always staying open to new ways of seeing, willing to take a stand, but also willing to let it go when necessary, and to remain continually engaged with the text. I'd just like to end by saying that though I do realize that to appreciate someone's work, one does not have to necessarily know the creator. However, it will make the reading of the book far more engaging, meaningful, and joyful if the reader knows how truly wonderful the spirit of this wanderer is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Disha. Um, uh, the conversation starts with the caricature made by a young caricature artist who is a student at Srishti School. And that caricature itself uh, suggests that the scholar and whose work we are discussing here in this conversation allows us to be playful with him. And this is my litmus test with any scholar. If I don't feel I have liberty to be irreverent, playful, if I don't have space to tease that scholar, crack a joke about him or her, then as a reader, I'm not really at ease. I feel that there's too much of smartness which is choking me, and that thankfully does not happen with any of the writings when we were a student much later than you, Disha, and all of you. Actually, I'm the youngest in this lot who have studied at JNU and had the pleasure of listening to Professor Pathak's lecture. This is the major thing which I get from his writing as well as his personality as a teacher, that it allows you, as Shumona said, and she has shared with me in past as well, that you feel that he lets you see his vulnerability as a scholar. That
Right.
yes, I am vulnerable in his writings also, in his reasoning. The vulnerability that he employs is his intellectual strength. And that is very unique. I mean, he does not bombard you with that vocabulary which you have referred to. I mean, Disha, you mentioned.
Yeah.
There is no bombardment of vocabulary, and yet you see in very philosophical language, you see, as Professor Thakur tried to emphasize for us, you see that totality of an ontology. And too many possibilities emerging from that kind of ontology. The divide, the binaries do not work in that ontology, right? So, however, taking that attitude of irreverence creatively and joining the young artist Kevin, who made this caricature, I pose this personal anxiety about this kind of writing and this kind of wonderful writing. However, I see that the contemporary situation, in typical social science terms, the discourses, the mainstream discourses, be it in academia or also outside academia, in the realm of journalism, in the realm of newspapers, everywhere. What happens to this kind of scholarship? What happens to this with this kind of reasoning? We understand the importance of this reasoning, but we also know that there is this mainstream intellectual politics in universities, outside universities, which would create such a notion that we would not be able to, even if we want, we would not be able to see the merit of this work. So how to face that situation with this kind of work? Or we just say that, it's our individual choice and we live with that. So this is my personal anxiety. I would invite any of you. I'm not trying to summarize the whole lot of pointers which have emerged from your discussion, but I'm taking forward this conversation and I'm inviting you to please pitch in with your own observations.
I think I have been facing this question a lot around his writing from my younger colleagues and friends and many people. I think that I read in the comment box that one option is to ignore the responses and go ahead with this kind of writing. I don't think so. My concern is that as social scientists, we are continuously losing our grounds.
Right.
See, we are unable to communicate with the people. And therefore, what we see today is a kind of backlash against the intellectuals. So society as such has become quite anti-intellectual. One of the reasons is that the language that we use, the methods that we use, the techniques of communication that we use, there's some deeper problem there. And he very rightly mentions in the beginning itself that if we can communicate, the violence will be much lesser. So I don't think we need to ignore the critique. In fact, we need to confront it and confront it with more explanatory techniques to see that what is that this kind of writing is able to comprehend, that the mainstream writing is not able to comprehend.
Right.
And does that give any advantage to us in terms of communicating and understanding our own people? Like I can very well understand the way he's trying to map the subconscious of the people in last few decades through films. It's only through films actually that we can comprehend the transformations in the collective consciousness. We cannot do it through social sciences, the writings in social sciences. Other day there was a big debate about this in a forum where top intellectuals of India like Partho Chatterjee and Sudipto Kaviraj were available, and they all were trying to argue that there's a need to decolonize social sciences. And the point that came again and again, that we have to find out where do you get the authentic comprehension of social reality. And my point was that you get that in literature and cinema and other art forms.
Right.
And that is the point I think he's making. And that is, he's also allowing us to witness a kind of writings that could be done to engage with this new kind of understanding of social reality. So therefore, I think that we should not only try to bring people on the table to read and understand this, as this is the need of the hour, and all social science. I mean, I have been debating with my own colleagues in the center, and now they are gradually agreeing that this is needed to be done. This kind of thing has to be done. Only what they are not agreeing till now is, and that is very typical of any colonized mind, that they think there is only a particular way of writing social sciences. and there's a particular method to be adopted. That is all colonized. I think it doesn't help. Social science, I think what we have not been able to capture is that a new model of social science was done by Gandhi, Tagore, Ambedkar.
Right.
After the freedom struggle in the post-independence area, we abandoned that model, and therefore we have lost link with the people. I think Pathak's whole approach is to reclaim that model, and therefore we need to really take it on.
Right. That's very good way of seeing it. That necessity to reclaim the lost model, relatively lost model, and even if it is retrieved by some, it's retrieved as a component, a peripheral, or a component of modern social thought, but it does not allow a model to emerge, a model of intellectual reasoning. So, Shumona, you wanted to come in.
Sure. No, I mean, I think that this point that we're talking about, this style of writing, is really important to me, because as a filmmaker or as an artist, I feel that the politics have always been in the form. You know, what is the form that you are choosing to express? Are you using the industrial method of filmmaking? Are you using an independent method of filmmaking? Unfortunately, I mean, I think that all as sociologists, a lot of faith in filmmakers, but I would probably say the same thing about my peers, that they need to really look at the languages that they've adopted. So I'm wondering whether the call of the hour of what this book offers us is actually to cultivate the human spirit, not just as a sociologist or as a filmmaker or as a novelist, because anyone is capable in any field of selling out. And I think what this book really is defiant about is this tendency to just take what's given to you, not to churn it, not to make it your own, and to find a language which is authentic and expresses your experiences. And the first step is to be able to acknowledge that, you know, I mean, one of the most inspiring things for me when I was learning from Professor Pathak was just how much attention he gives and importance to Indian thinkers. Indian thinkers not necessarily defined as professional sociologists. And how does including that kind of thought, whether it's cinema, whether it's the conversation that he may have with a teacher in a restaurant, how does any kind of experience, reading, thought, engagement, that is our responsibility to, as human beings, not just sociologists, not just filmmakers, to make that authentic and to express it in a way which is transparent. And what I really admire as a non-academic person is that there is no hiding behind any theoretical jargon in this book. It is kind of like he's internalized all of the theory, the knowledge, the you know, most current publications. He's made those ideas his own. He's kept what works for him and is relevant for where he is at in this lifetime, and shares that as his small contribution to the world, not trying to hog up this space and saying, look, I've come up with the most radical, new way of looking at things, and then churning out students who are going to kind of, you know, propel that. Yeah. And I also wanted to just say that I feel so I admire so much his defiance of the genre of what is scholarly sociological writing, because I think that as a filmmaker, you know that when you defy genre, you are making yourself vulnerable. Genre has its own expectations, and if you defy that, you are really opening yourself up into a new kind of language and form.
So, Shumona, I sincerely believe you should develop a script, a cinematic script on sociologists in India, and some kind of dramatic work.
Yes, we'll do a mockumentary, and that'll be very good.
I mean, it's not only me, but a lot of people, a lot of sociologists in Europe, in America, also some, very few, but some in India, have said that sociologists without a sense of humor are dangerous for society. And therefore, we need to invite the filmmakers like you to give us back our sense of humor.
Definitely. That would be really great fun.
Disha, you want to come in?
No, I think I completely agree with what Manindra and Shumona have said. And I think his books are far more academic than any other academic book, which is regarded to be academic. There's much more depth and stuff. And he takes positions, he takes stands. But I do realize that I think there's much more acceptance of his work now across the old guard. I think that's there. And the kind of writing that he does for papers, I mean, there's a lot of courage that he displays and not being politically correct and taking a stand where he needs to. So yeah, I mean, I just needs to appreciate that. But I do feel that if people know him as a person, that kind of helps. So then you kind of relate the book to the person that he is, and he is very special in that sense. So then the connect gets even more firmly established.
Any individual reader will start on an individual journey with this kind of work. That itself is an interesting trajectory. As I always recall Rahul Sankrityayan for saying this, and he drew an interesting parallel between the phenomenon of ghumakkadi, wandering, and a book. And this book of Professor Avijit Pathak has that sense of wandering, and one instantly recalls Rahul Sankrityayan's this parallel, which suggested that no book is a final product.
Yeah.
With every book, a new wandering begins. So I suppose for many of us, it would be a beginning of new wandering.
The book has a very wide canvas, and as a realist, if I look at the kind of things that he has talked about, it is only about the good things of human beings. The real problem today is that we are witnessing the other aspects of human being much more under the influence of capitalism.
Right.
And sometimes we are probably transformed, as some interesting serial called Mind Hunt is suggesting.
Right.
That earlier there were reasons for crime. Now there's no reason for crime. We have started enjoying crime. So that darker aspect of contemporary social life, how do we engage with that? How do we handle that? Can we really access the inner self? Can everybody, even today, access the inner self? What kind of technology of self is needed for that? These are things I think they have not been meditated upon.
Right.
As a sociologist, or as a normal thinking human being, if I talk in terms of Indian philosophical term, then the Purusharth and the Vikar all have to be comprehended. Gandhi, I think, was trying to, towards the end of his life, was trying to work on this. How do you manage the Vikars? Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Mad, Moh, etc., etc. Only by saying that this is not internal to us, integral to us, would not work. Actually, they are integral to us. We are like that at times. And of course, the external circumstances may kind of ignite that in us, but they are an integral part of us.
Right.
So how do we look at that? How do we create a sociology which can comprehend the whole thing and provide us some transformative solutions? What do we do with that? How do we do that? I think that part is not there. It's very goody thing, very nice things, nice human being. That's obviously there, and it reflects his personality also. But as a realist, when I look at this, then I find that, in fact, I would define myself as ethical realist. So I see a lot of ethics there, but the realism is missing.
I in a way, I agree with that part. I mean, how to really put into effect the Gandhian soul force to deal with the abundant cunningness around us.
Brute force. Right. How the soul force deals with the brute force. That is, and within ourselves, not outside. Right. We do have soul force and brute force constantly struggling. How do we manage that? Yeah.
True. I mean, if I try to be nice to all my neighbors, they will immediately think that this guy is a spineless fellow who can be. And that is where, sir, I believe one has to return to Panchtantra along with Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita alone may not suffice in our time. One has to go back to our own George Orwell, who would give us, I mean, why to compare it with George Orwell, but who gave us Panchtantra to help us understand the cunningness around us, which also inspires cunningness in us. So in that way, I suppose.
No, I think there is when I say ethical realism, I can explain that in a small story. That a sadhu is standing in the flowing water, and there's a river, and there's a insect coming, and the sadhu tries to save the insect. Insect bites the sadhu.
Exactly.
Then people and goes back to water. I mean, you know the story.
Yes.
He does it again and again. So somebody asks him, "Why do you do it? Don't you understand that it will bite you?" He says, "I'm doing my job. Insect is doing its own job." So not that I'm not knowing that it would bite me, yet I'm doing something. So knowing itself, understanding itself is extremely important. Then the decision is mine. I may decide to suffer, I may decide to do whatever I want, but not understanding would be foolishness. Therefore, ethical realism, and I think one of the great ethical realists was Kautilya himself. So we can talk about it some other day, but that part seems to be a little missing. Not to say that his faith on the human being and inner self is misplaced. I think that is absolutely necessary, and we don't have any option left if we want to save humanity now.
Right.
But then,
and Shumona had something very interesting to share. I mean, from gendered perspective as well, one can come up with very interesting criticism, and which is very necessary for the discourse to be generated around this kind of work. It's necessary. So, Shumona, please.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that on Professor Thakur's point, I think that one of the reasons why we all love Pathak sir is because he is actually an idealist. And we need that lack of realism somewhere to give us that hope that I think he has. I think for me, and it's not really just a gender thing, I think that I just found it very striking that in the book, there was almost no reference to women is either filmmakers or authors or thinkers or anything really. But he said he's of course occupies a very feminine position that he oftentimes discusses and emphasizes. And yet I think that there is a real discomfort somewhere on that. And I'm not really sure, I was thinking that I don't feel like I want to criticize him on that point, but someone else may come and say that, well, his take on Ambedkar and how he dealt with Ambedkar was not adequate. So there are those kind of issues.
Right. So, Disha, would you like to add something? Mike.
I can't disagree with Shumona. I mean, I think that's a very valid point, but I also feel the limitations emerge from our own perspectives and our own expectations. So no book or no work can be completely comprehensive and eclectic. So if you're expecting something in the book and we feel there is something there, we pointed out as a limitation. I think he's pretty aware of what's going around us. He's been writing extensively on it. But he calls himself, and he believes he's an eternal optimist. And that's, I think, something which you have to grant to. I don't think we need to specifically look for limitations.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, this too is fairly agreeable. I mean, no one book can give us everything. So therefore, we need to expect Professor Avijit Pathak to continue writing and giving us more and more of this kind of materials. Nabnipa, now I request you to please draw closure.
So thank you very much, of course. But before I end, there's just there's one thing which I find striking, in Pathak's works, and not just his works, but the way he has done this discipline, and I've known him for about 26, 27 years now. One of his early students, like Disha, Shumona, three of us. And one point I don't know if Shumona mentioned, and that is that whenever you read Pathak or any of his work, or, it's like, if you have not met him for 25 years, like Shumona did not meet him. But the moment she met him, it was like fresh. It was like, she could just pick up from the point that she left. And as if there was no gap at all, So the temporal gap, and this, we have been discussing, that we meet on weekends, I and Shumona, and we keep talking about this, that this is something which is so unique that you never feel that, you can pick up at any point, you can pick up and you can begin, and it's like it's going on. So this is something which I have, personally, experienced with him. And so even if we don't talk for months, which does not happen these days because we have frequent conversations, but this is, as a human being, as a teacher, I think this is something unique. There's one more thing, and that is that just like, his colleagues have told Professor Thakur that, that he writes, well and all that, but then that's not sociology. So similarly, I have had similar things told to me by my colleagues and my friends from JNU, कि सब कुछ ठीक है, लेकिन ये sociology नहीं. So then the point is, what is sociology? So this is the question that I think Avijit Pathak kind of addresses, takes headlong, head on. He addresses head on, straight away. And this is something which is interesting. So we know of scholars who actually straddle two different worlds. There are a number of people, so there are people who do their sociology or whatever very seriously, but they also write novels, they write poetry, they publish poetry, but they are distinct. Poetry as poetry and sociology as sociology, or mathematics. And I know, it's the IT sector has number of such scholars, so who publish books, novels, write novels, but do it. But what is interesting about Avijit Pathak is that he did not choose to do the two things separately, but expanded sociology, to include, so in a way, as Professor Thakur said, atheists make this whole aesthetics of politics. So he actually ends up, turning sociology around, right, and not really doing it. So he does not produce a bunch of, poems, right, because the very discipline can, be a poetry for him. So I think to take it upon oneself, this responsibility and the courage to actually to turn around this discipline. I mean, what is sociology? So sociology नहीं करते हैं या जो भी है. Sorry, don't mind my Hindi, please. करते हैं. So मैं sociology का meaning ही बदल दूंगी. So it's like, for instance, when we talk about science, so science in a narrow sense becomes science. But if we look at science in the sense that the Germans used it, Wissenschaft, then we also know that it's an expanded understanding of science. So any systematic inquiry, knowledge is actually scientific. So I expand my discipline. Instead of fixing my boundaries, I just stretch. And, and therefore, I think this is something, so whether you like it or not, but this is something which he has done. So I think this is what has impressed me. I mean, continues to for so many years now. On the other hand, I sometimes, and I tell him often that, when I read you, I often think that the world is a seamless place. Everything is so nice. As if, everyone will be nice, they will talk nicely, they love each other. But then people are not like that. And, things are not, that's not what is, real. And then, of course, we keep talking and what is real and so on and so forth. So So it has been a pleasure, being his student. And this discussion, when we thought about this discussion, I and Dev, it was just to have, to record these small voices. We are very small people. So, just to record these small voices and just express our gratitude.
We are happy with our smallness.
Yes. So just express a gratitude to a teacher. Small is beautiful. So thank you so much.